Welcome, and thank you for joining us. My name is Molly Rose Kaufman, and I am co-founder of the University of Orange, a free school in Orange, New Jersey. I am a member of the 400 Years of Inequality National Organizing Committee. The 400 Years of Inequality initiative began in 2016 as a coalition of people and organizations who issued a call to observe the 400th anniversary of African people being brought as captives to Jamestown, Virginia, to be sold into bondage. The call went nationwide, and observances around the country included storytelling walks, youth workshops, and community concerts. On October 20th, 2019, Reverend William J. Barber II preached during a solemn observance, Stolen Hands, Stolen Lands, at Riverside Church on the moral failings of our current political and social institutions. His speech powerfully described the many ways that the institutions and systems designed to justify and uphold chattel slavery are still present in our society today. In 2020, we continue to grapple with the injustice born out of the ecology of inequality. The coronavirus pandemic is an urgent reminder of how deeply embedded systemic inequality is in our society. At this moment, we are taking part in and bearing witness to massive people's uprisings around the world in response to police brutality and the systems that sustain it. I am reminded of the words of my grandfather, Ernest Thompson, a prominent Black labor and civil rights leader. He said, "Our experience has proven that the powerless can win power and enter the central arena to fight for their own democratic urgent needs, as well as for the needs of all people." Now, more than ever, we call on the voices of people from movements who have struggled for the right for health for all. 400 Years of Inequality and Voices of a People's History are partners in amplifying radical voices from our past. Together, we work from a shared belief that understanding our history and sharing the voices of those who led and took part in the people's movements of the past lays the foundation for our organizing work today. I invite you to join the 400 Years of Inequality on June 20th as we watch the Mass Poor People's Assembly and Moral March on Washington online. You can find information on our website linked to in the chat below. To open this event, I now read from the 400 Years of Inequality Statement of Observance. Today, we gather in a place where inequality still prevails. We gather here in 2020 to remember the story of this place and to think of other times and other places. We remember that in 1619, Africans were brought to the Virginia colony and sold into bondage. We remember that those Africans were forced to work land stolen from the native people. We remember that white workers, men and women, were forced into indentured servitude. We see that from those roots was built an ecology of inequality. And we know that we don't want to live in the house of white supremacy. Therefore, on this day, we lift up this place. We acknowledge this land and the sovereignty of the indigenous people who have lived here. We lift up all the ancestors who have struggled for justice. And in their memory, we proclaim that we are the history of a just future. I now am happy to welcome educator and activist Brian Jones, who will be our narrator for the evening. Brian is a longstanding partner of both Voices of a People's History and 400 Years of Inequality. We are grateful that he's with us today.
Good evening. In 1966, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. spoke at a press conference in Chicago in connection with the Medical Committee for Human Rights. Of all the forms of inequality, he said, injustice in health is the most shocking and inhumane. I see no alternative to direct action and creative nonviolence, King said, to raise the conscience of the nation. In this spirit, as people across the world unite to rally, protest, and fight for equality and justice in the face of state-sanctioned brutality against Black lives, in the midst of a pandemic that disproportionately, devastatingly affects Black and Indigenous people and communities of color, we gather tonight to celebrate the words of those, past and present, who dare to speak out and fight back. Our health depends on it. Thank you for joining this, our first virtual event. So should there be any technical challenges, please stay with us. We will use the chat function tonight to keep you updated and share information on different organizations that we're lifting up throughout the evening. If you have anything to spare, please support these organizations, which have been fighting injustice in our communities for years and are in the thick of the current struggle. We begin tonight with A Litany for Survival by Audre Lorde, read by poet and activist Stacey Ann Chin and her daughter, Zuri. Lorde was a self-described Black, lesbian, mother, warrior, poet who dedicated her life and creative talent to confronting racism, sexism, classism, and homophobia. She was the poet laureate of New York from 1991 to 1992, when she died of breast cancer.
A Litany for Survival, Audre Lorde. For those of us who live at the shoreline, standing upon the constant edges of decision, crucial and alone. For those of us who cannot indulge the passing dreams of choice, who love in doorways coming and going, in the hours between dawns, looking inward and outward, at once before and after, seeking a now that can breed futures, like bread in our children's mouths, so their dreams will not reflect the death of ours.
For those of us who are imprinted with fear, like a faint line in the center of our foreheads, learning to be afraid with our mother's milk. For by this weapon, this illusion of some safety to be found, the heavy-footed hope to silence us. For all of us, this instant and this triumph,
we were never meant to survive. And when the sun rises, we are afraid it might not remain. When the sun sets, we are afraid it might not rise in the morning. When our stomachs are full, we are afraid of indigestion. When our stomachs are empty, we are afraid we may never eat again. And when we are loved, we are afraid love will vanish. When we are alone, we are afraid love will never return.
And when we speak, we are afraid our words will not be heard nor welcomed. But when we are silent, we are still afraid. So it is better to speak, remembering we were never meant to survive.
The song Talk About It was written in response to ongoing injustice in the world, in the hope that we as the human race find healthier solutions for healing and ending racism. The music is written and arranged by Martha Redbone and Aaron Whitby.
Father, come and look on these faces, and maybe you could see through our eyes. Words are hard to find through these changes, not just another day in a life. Somehow everything managed to turn around. Many times I try to reach you, I got no reply. And sorry just might heal us, but it's not enough. It's just a crazy world we got. Why can't we talk about it? What are we gonna do? Here lies the logic that remains today. We don't know what we're in for. There's flashing lights, no open doors, and it's sad to watch, make you cry. We're too young to die. Brothers, send a message to stand down. And you gotta hurry, for it's too late. I only wish that we had the answers. Then maybe we could save the day. And how long will this go on? We're terrified that love is gone, and it's plain to see in every heart and mind. And the words are few and seldom, hard to find. And I just look to the sky and ask you why can't we talk about it? What are we gonna do? Here lies the logic that remains today. And we don't know what we're in for. The flashing lights, no open doors, and it's sad to watch, make you cry. We're too young to die.
Clergymen. African-American abolitionist and clergyman Absalom Jones, together with Richard Allen, founded the Free African Society, a mutual aid organization for African Americans in Philadelphia, which included many people newly freed from slavery after the American Revolutionary War. In a pamphlet distributed after the 1793 yellow fever epidemic, Matthew Carey accused the Black community of profiteering from the disease and of plundering the houses of the sick. In response, Allen and Jones published this pamphlet, documenting the brave actions of Black people who dedicated themselves to fighting the disease, including a meticulous accounting of payments and expenses, read tonight by Dr. Robert Fullalove, Professor of Clinical Socio-Medical Sciences at the Mailman School of Public Health.
We have many unprovoked enemies who begrudge us the liberty we enjoy and are glad to hear of any complaint against our color, be it just or unjust, in consequence of which we are more earnestly endeavoring all in our power to war, rebuke and exhort our African friends to keep a conscience void of offense towards God and man, and at the same time would not be backward to interfere when stigmas or oppression appear pointed at or attempted against them unjustly, and we are confident we shall stand justified in the fight of the candid and judicious for such conduct. It is even to this day a generally received opinion in this city that our color was not so liable to the sickness as the whites. We hope our friends will pardon us for setting this matter in its true state. The public were informed that in the West Indies and other places where this terrible malady had been, it was observed the Blacks were not affected with it. Happy would it have been for you, and much more so for us, if this observation had been verified by our experience. When the people of color had the sickness and died, we were imposed upon and told it was not with the prevailing sickness until it became too notorious to be denied. Then we were told some few died, but not many. Thus were our services extorted at the peril of our lives, yet you accuse us of extorting a little money from you. A bill of mortality for the year 1793, published by Matthew Whitehead and John Ormrod, clerks, and Joseph Dalby Seston, will convince any reasonable man that will examine it that as many colored people died in proportion as others. In 1792, there were 67 of our colored buried. And in 1793, it amounted to 305. Thus, the burials among us have increased more than fourfold. Was this not in a great degree the effects of the services of the unjustly vilified Black people? We have been pained to see the widows come to you crying and wringing their hands and in very great distress on account of their husband's death. Having nobody to help them, they were obliged to come to get their husbands buried. Their neighbors were afraid to go to their help or to condole with them. We ascribe such unfriendly conduct to the frailty of human nature and not to willful unkindness or hardness of heart. Notwithstanding the complaint Mr. Carey hath paid us, we have found reports spread of our taking between 100 and 200 beds from houses where people died. Such slanderers as there who propagate such willful lies are dangerous, although unworthy of notice. We wish if any person hath the least suspicion of us, they would endeavor to bring us to the punishment which such atrocious conduct must deserve. And by this means, the innocent will be cleared from reproach and the guilty known. We shall now conclude with the following proverb, which we think applicable to those in our color who exposed their lives in the late afflicting dispensation. God and a soldier, all men do adore, in a time of war and not before. When the war is over and all things righted, God is forgotten and the soldier slighted.
Chile's Salvador Allende was the first socialist president in Latin America. Democratically elected in 1970, he took his own life during the far-right coup led by General Pinochet in 1973. Before he was president, Allende was a physician and served as Chile's Minister of Health. In this speech from 1939, read by actress Laura Gomez, Allende makes the case for a radical reimagining of Chile's healthcare system and broader society along socialist lines.
Chile, like most South American countries, has lived at the mercy of economic and cultural colonialism. The progress obtained in national production has not meant an improvement in living standards for the poor. The capitalist enterprises are not concerned that the working population lives in deplorable conditions exposed to disease. This has been the despicable destiny of semi-colonial countries, which have been an inexhaustible emporium of riches and raw materials servicing the splendor of the great nations of the world. It is easy to realize the state of misery that the people have lived under, the lack of hygienic habits, the predisposition to epidemics and diseases of high social impact. But the people grow and reach a maturity, and it is then that they become restless and resolve to conquer the right to well-being, health, and culture. A cold examination of our social medical reality is the best way to diagnose and apply remedies to reestablish health and vigor in our people. This is what has moved the Minister of Health to tell the nation about the true hygienic and sanitary conditions of the country and to put forward solutions towards finding ways to rehabilitate our race. These medical measures will only produce benefits if they are accompanied by economic and financial resolutions that raise the standard of living in our citizens. It is not possible to provide health and knowledge to a malnourished people, dressed in rags and working under merciless exploitation. The distressing demographic and sanitary outlook of the country requires a deep reflection from all Chileans, rich and poor, left and right, governors and governed. No social class can feel immune from epidemics or safe from contagious diseases. Social hygiene, public health, medicine do not allow compromises. We have, of course, almost the highest mortality rate for children and adults, comparable only to the more backward countries. National health statistics are atrocious, with the state unable to significantly reduce the ravages of tuberculosis, syphilis, and other contagious diseases. The average span of life of Chileans is at most 24 years, while in Switzerland, Germany, Denmark, and England, it is above 50. All progressive spirits will agree with the Minister of Health that we cannot waste any more time and that we must put into action a massive project aimed at restoring our nationality in its three fundamental aspects: effective economic improvement of the working class, intensifying and extending the measures of prevention in national health programs, and an intense literacy campaign in the lower layers of the country. The Minister of Health warns that the country must be considered to be in a state of emergency. It is necessary that the well-off contribute without haggling for their own security. It is necessary that every one of our citizens support the gigantic task of lifting our country economically, health-wise, and culturally, and thus bring the most dignified and effective benefit for the Republic. Let's remember that Chile is, at present, a tense country in pursuit of its rights, a country trying to mark its own destiny.
In March 1987, the political movement to confront the AIDS crisis found militant expression with the formation of ACT UP in New York. Here, activist Vito Russo, a founding member, talks about his experience confronting the AIDS crisis in a speech read by comedian Hari Kondabolu.
A friend of mine in New York City has a half-fare transit card, which means that you can get on buses and subways for half price. And the other day, when he showed his card to the token attendant, the attendant asked what his disability was, and he said, "I have AIDS." And the attendant said, "No, you don't. If you had AIDS, you'd be home dying." And so I wanted to speak out today as a person with AIDS who is not dying. You know, for the past 3 years since I was diagnosed, my family thinks two things about my situation. One, they think I'm going to die. And two, they think that my government is doing absolutely everything in their power to stop that. And they're wrong on both counts. If I'm dying from anything, I'm dying from homophobia. If I'm dying from anything, I'm dying from racism. If I'm dying from anything, it's from indifference and red tape, because these are the things that are preventing an end to this crisis. If I'm dying from anything, I'm dying from Jesse Helms. If I'm dying from anything, I'm dying from the President of the United States. And especially, if I'm dying from anything, I'm dying from the sensationalism of newspapers and magazines and television shows, which are interested in me as a human interest story, only as long as I'm willing to be a helpless victim, but not if I'm fighting for my life. If I'm dying from anything, I'm dying from the fact that not enough rich, white, heterosexual men have gotten AIDS for anybody to give a shit. You know, living with AIDS in this country is like living in the Twilight Zone. Living with AIDS is like living through a war which is happening only for those people who happen to be in the trenches. Every time a shell explodes, you look around and you discover that you've lost more of your friends, but nobody else notices. It isn't happening to them. They're walking the streets as though we weren't living through some sort of nightmare. And only you can hear the screams of the people who are dying and their cries for help. No one else seems to be noticing. Someday, the AIDS crisis will be over. Remember that. And when that day comes, when that day has come and gone, there'll be people alive on this earth, gay people and straight people, men and women, black and white, who will hear the story that once there was a terrible disease in this country and all over the world, and that a brave group of people stood up and fought, and in some cases gave their lives so that other people might live. And we have to commit ourselves to doing that. And then, after we kick the shit out of this disease, we're all going to have to be alive to kick the shit out of this system so that this never happens again.
These words, read by musician and educator Margot Simmons, are from a 1977 interview with Dr. Connie Uri, a physician and Choctaw Cherokee, who helped organize a federal lawsuit for implementation of the Indian Health Improvement Act and compensation for those harmed by forced sterilization. She supported the struggle at Wounded Knee, and Alcatraz, and was a member of Indian Women United for Social Justice.
My first case was a woman who had been sterilized at age 20. They did a complete hysterectomy on her, and the reason given was that she had a drinking problem, and they said that she wasn't taking care of her other 2 children, and she shouldn't have any more. And at age 26, when she came to me, she had resolved her drinking problem and was fighting to get her children back. And she was wanting to marry, and she wanted a womb transplant. That was the first case. And from there, I started asking more questions. I knew that medically speaking, you don't at age 20 take a woman's uterus out. The only indication is cancer or uncontrolled hemorrhage. So it had to be a completely elective. It had to be for no other reason but to stop pregnancies. And you simply don't do that medically. So why had she, at age 20, had this operation? It's castration. So I asked the question. I started asking, and this was the beginning of my search. We don't know how many. That's why we feel when we have a lawsuit against the government, we will finally find out how many Indian women have truly been sterilized. We know that it's more than 25%. We know it's happening. I can't go anywhere in the Indian community, but where women don't come up and say they want to talk to me. I take a deep breath because I know I'm going to hear another horror story. You don't solicit these things. It's so tragic. They tell what happened, and it's always the doctor that says, "This is good for you. You should have this done." The women don't come in and say, "Sterilize me." In this government accounting thing, they said 500 Sioux women were sterilized. Some of the traditional chiefs in South Dakota on the Sioux reservation called over to the Indian Health Service area office, and they said they wanted to find out how come this was done. And so the Indian Health Service told them, oh, they all came in here and wanted to be sterilized. And the chief says, you mean our women walked into the hospital and got on the operating table and said, sterilize us? That's not the way it happens. And of course, the Indian Health Service sees the insanity, the ridiculousness of this statement. The United States government has made a study of Indian health. They finally documented that our health care is 30 years behind the rest of the people in the country. So finally, after 5 years, they have passed a bill in Congress. Last September 30th, President Ford signed it. And the act says that the United States government now recognizes Indian health care is 30 years behind the rest of the country. They admit it, and they're going to do something about it. So President Ford signed this bill, but he left office and he didn't allocate any money for it. So now we have a new man who is going to solve the Indian problem. So he has taken a red line and he has drawn a line through the Indian health dollar. We're not very high on his priority list. To Indian people, it's like a parade. One goes, another comes. One goes, another comes. Nothing changes. Now here's a law. When you pass something in the United States Congress and it's signed by a president, that's a law. And he's not obeying the law. The law says that he is to improve the Indian health and bring it up to the level. We're not asking for better health care than the rest of the American people. We're asking for the same. President Carter has beautiful words about human rights. What about the human rights of American Indians? If he denies us medicine, it's just like he shoots us. Does it make more acceptable to his religion that he denies us medicine rather than to shoot us outright? I'm a physician. I can only diagnose something. I can't make something well without medicine. And I can't be silent. I don't know what he has in his budget that is more important than a human life.
In a searing account from the front lines of the current pandemic, Emily Pierce-Scala, registered nurse and member of the Minnesota Nurses Association and National Nurses United, expresses her anguish, anger, and frustration at the country's public health response as COVID-19 ravages the population and its healthcare workers. We are honored to have it read tonight by Bonnie Castillo, Executive Director of National Nurses United and the California Nurses Association and National Nurses Organizing Committee.
What is it like to be a nurse in a pandemic? Every day I bounce through the stages of grief like a pinball. The ricochet and the whiplash leaves my soul tired and bruised. Denial. I've spent less and less time in the denial stage. Still, I see many of my loved ones, politicians and laypersons, still stuck in this phase. Anger. When our elders and immunosuppressed folks are referred to as disposable members of society, when the pocketbooks of stockholders are considered more important than human lives, when we've known for decades this pandemic was coming, I burn with anger. Anger at the system that prioritizes profits over health. It's the system that regularly runs out of essential and critical supplies seasonally. I have anger knowing the fragility of our supply chain that has been exposed time and time again, especially after the earthquakes in Puerto Rico, and yet nothing was done to reinforce them. Bargaining. The governing bodies bargaining with supply chain availability over scientific evidence. A paper bag is given magic powers to somehow preserve masks that are already expired and soiled. Droplet precautions are now satisfactory for airborne illnesses, but don't you dare leave Scotch tape on the walls. Depression. Heaviness in my heart, knowing my coworkers and friends will become unwilling sacrifices so the system can continue in its self-destructive path. And there's grief for the many people I will not have the resources to care for and save. Acceptance. I've accepted that I will be infected with COVID-19 at some point. I'm not scared of getting sick. I'm scared of infecting those who will not survive. I check every day on our state's available hospital beds and ventilators. I wonder if my illness becomes severe, will there be the resources left for me? By then, I'm tagged in another social media post praising me for being a hero. And I'm instantly flung back into the pinball machine as my emotions ricochet through the stages. If I die, I don't want to be remembered as a hero. I want my death to make you angry too. I want you to politicize my death. I want you to use it as fuel to demand change in this industry, to demand protection, living wages, and safe working conditions for nurses and all workers. Use my death to mobilize others. Use my name at the bargaining table. Use my name to shame those who have profited and failed to act, leaving us to clean up the mess. Don't say heaven has gained an angel. Tell them negligence and greed has murdered a person for choosing a career dedicated to compassion and service.
Margaret Charles Smith was a Black midwife in Greene County, Alabama for nearly 5 decades. In the book Linda Holmes co-authored with her, they describe how most Black women in the county relied on each other and on Indigenous healers and folk practitioners to establish a system of mutual aid and self-help that grew out of kinship and community. When faced with medical complications, Smith accompanied mothers to a hospital more than a 3-hour drive from Greene County. In the era of Jim Crow, a Black funeral home owner made a hearse available for emergency transportation. Even when Alabama stopped issuing lay permits to midwives in the 1970s, Smith continued to be recognized by families and public health advocates as a midwife who successfully cared for countless mothers and babies, Black and white.
One time I had twins, and the woman had high blood pressure. She was diabetic. The doctor always told me when they was going to be twins. But he didn't tell me about them two. Before I knew anything, here comes the second baby. So the mother was awfully weak. She had 7 children before she had the twins. And the fact of the business was, she worked hard. She worked hard anyway. After the last baby came, we called the doctor. All right, I got both of the babies, but just as fast as I can get her to come to with alcohol, camphor, and stuff, she would go out again. I told her husband, look, you get out from here. Call the doctor. She had a doctor, but we were a long ways away. I said, that doctor, he saw her all through her pregnancy. You tell him to come and come quick. This woman has a high blood and sugar. She's bleeding too much. The more I surgery her, the more blood comes and she just passes out. I tried everything in the book. I even had salt in the middle of her head with alcohol. I had a rag so it wouldn't run down in her eye. She had a quilt in between her legs. Let me tell you, we were just wringing out the blood. I kept trying to massage her stomach to stop the bleeding. So let me tell you, when he came, the doctor said to me, Margaret, what's the matter? I called myself wanting to explain to him what the trouble was as far as I knew. He said, I'll tell you what you ought to have done. You ought to have gotten yourself a bucket of water and poured it on her. Now, those are the words he gave me. You know what I said? I said, well, I'll tell you. I left that for you to do. I was looking at him dead in his face. I was getting mad then. He gave her one shot in her arm and reached down and got his little grip out the door. I said, Lord, have mercy. If this woman here dies on me, whoo, that shot didn't raise her a bit. It was in my mind, if she doesn't stop bleeding soon, I'd have to carry her to the hospital. I kept trying to massage her stomach till I couldn't get it hard like a grapefruit to stop the bleeding. But as soon as I get it hard, it quits. And here comes the blood. See, most of the doctors weren't too lovely with the colored folk. They have to make their money. That's the only reason they had to try to go along with us. But me, I had to sit there all day, all night, and she was regularly passing out. I was there from midnight until 12 o'clock the next day. But let me tell you something now, you listen to me good. That lady is still living right now. A lot of hospitals around here, they just wouldn't fool with you. The only place we had to carry somebody when they were sick, we had to carry a patient to Tuskegee, and that was a long ways from here. I carried about 4 or 5 from Tuskegee. I carried one girl, she had TB. That was a good bit of travel. You know, if the ladies had a complaint, anything irregular, doctor did not want to fool with them anymore because of the condition they were in. Those ladies had to go to Tuskegee, long ways to Tuskegee. Now you listen to me good. Lots of them. So many had babies. So many babies. They were just worn. They were truly worn, completely worn out.
Born into a working class family in Wales, Aneurin, or Nye Bevan, left school at 13 and worked as a miner, where he became involved in union organizing. Much later, Bevan was Minister of Health and Housing under the Labour Party government and was responsible for the creation of the UK's National Health Service in 1948. Deeply committed to socialism, Bevan was one of the most remarkable political reformers in the history of the English-speaking world. Here is an excerpt from his 1952 book, In Place of Fear, read by actor Susan Porfar.
Preventative medicine, which is merely another way of saying health by collective action, builds up a system of social habits that constitute an indispensable part of what we mean by civilization. In this sphere, values which are in essence socialist challenge and win victory after victory against the assertions of the competitive society. When we consider the great discoveries in medicine that have revolutionized surgery and the treatment of disease, the same pattern emerges. They were made by dedicated men and women whose work was inspired by values that have nothing to do with the rapacious bustle of the stock exchange. Pasteur, Simpson, Jenner, Lister, Fleming. The list is endless. Society becomes more wholesome, more serene, and spiritually healthier if it knows that its citizens have at the back of their consciousness the knowledge that not only themselves, but all their fellows will have access, when ill, to the best that medical skill can provide. If the job is to be done, the state must accept financial responsibility. Some American friends tried hard to persuade me that one way out of the alleged dilemma of providing free health treatment for people able to afford it would be to fix an income limit below which the treatment would be free, while those above must pay. This makes the worst of all worlds. In addition, it is exposed to lying and cheating and all sorts of insidious nepotism. The essence of a satisfactory health service is that the rich and poor are treated alike. Poverty is not a disability, and wealth is not advantaged. A free health service is a triumphant example of the superiority of collective action and public initiative. What emerges is the massive contribution the National Health Service makes to the equipment of a civilized society. New legislation on the National Health Service has been announced. It confirms our worst fears. If they are carried out, the proposals will mutilate the service in many of its most important activities. There is, however, ample evidence that the British people are reacting sharply against them. This sustains my contention that no government that attempts to destroy the health service can hope to command the support of the people.
Activist, singer, and writer Elaine Brown was chairman of the Black Panther Party from 1974 to 1977. The Panthers believed healthcare should be a human right, and their blending of health science with community engagement to popularize the cause of health justice for Black people and poor people has profound effects to this day. Here, Jamie Swift, founder and executive director of the organization Black Women Radicals, reads an excerpt from Elaine Brown's book, A Taste of Power.
I'm high on the people, they shouted in the awful gray of 7 a.m. Hundreds of Panthers were lined up in a West Side Chicago schoolyard, ready to start the day's work. Chairman Fred was making sure his chief of staff would see the good work the Illinois chapter was doing. Chicago Panthers, Fred explained, lined up that way every morning. It was a demonstration of discipline and commitment. Fred felt it was an inspirational way to get the day started. It was. I ain't gonna die slipping on no ice, Fred shouted into a bullhorn, walking up and down the aisles of Panthers like a Baptist preacher. I ain't gonna die slipping on no ice, Panthers shouted back. I ain't gonna die in no airplane crash. I ain't gonna die in no airplane crash, they responded in unison. I'm gonna die for the people, the chairman continued, his fist high, the steam of his breath bursting into the bitter early morning cold. I'm gonna die for the people, came the echo. 'Cause I live for the people, 'cause I'm high on the people, 'cause I love the people, power to the people, power to the people, power to the people. Tears were streaming down my face, stinging my frozen cheeks. This young 21-year-old Fred Hampton had aroused in me a surge of love for my people stronger than I had ever felt. I had been in New Haven in less than a week when the news bulletin raged out of Chicago on December 4th. Fred Hampton had been murdered. An early morning police raid had been made on Fred's house. He and another brother in the house, Mark Clark, had been killed. Fred's body had been riddled with bullets while he slept in his bed. Another news bulletin about Panthers came over the radio as I was preparing to leave for Chicago on the morning of December 8th. Another police assault on other Panthers. This time it was in Los Angeles. Dozens of bullets from Thompson to machine guns had been pumped into his bed, 2 bullets fired point blank into his head. It had been an FBI assassination under the direction of Special Agent Marlon Johnson, carried out by Illinois State Police, wielding 27 guns and led by James Gloves Davis. Davis and his cohorts had blasted the entire cracker box of a house in the dark before dawn, wounding Brenda Harris, Satchel, and Verlena Brewer, and killing young Mark Clark in their determination to reach their real target. Though the Chicago Tribune headlines, produced by longtime FBI friend and Tribune editor Clayton Kirkpatrick, supported the lie that the raiding police had been assaulted, everyone knew it was an assassination. It was according to plan, to eliminate the rise of a messianic Black man in the person of Fred Hampton. As the eulogies concluded, I could hear Panther sound trucks outside, winding through the icy streets, blasting Fred's favorite contemporary song, the one he had been making everybody sing along with him in those last days in Chicago. It was a Motown song, a Motown sound, the sound that seemed to be the sound of Black rebellion. Diana Ross and the Supremes were singing, "Someday we'll be together. Say it again, say it again, say it again." Now the procession passed before Fred's casket. I watched thousands file by with raised fists to Fred, hundreds of members of the Peace Stone Nation, uniformed in red berets, pounding fists against their chests in homage to the nation. It occurred to me that it was the end of 1969. I wiped away my tears, the voice of Fred Hampton now filling me as it rang out in the church and beyond. I ain't gonna die slipping on no ice. I ain't gonna die in no airplane crash. I'm gonna die for the people, because I live for the people, because I love the people. Power to the people, power to the people.
The Young Lords was a Puerto Rican political organization that began in the streets of Chicago and New York City in the 1960s. Influenced by the Black Panther Party's rejection of white society, they focused on practical activism, such as sanitation, testing for disease, and providing crucial social services. In 1970, they barricaded the Bronx's Lincoln Hospital, collaborating with medical staff to redirect proper treatment to the community. In this piece from their newspaper, Palante, we hear how they commandeered an X-ray truck to test for tuberculosis in East Harlem.
Every day, Puerto Rican people are faced with the same deadly health problem: tuberculosis, a disease that affects our lives and a disease that can be prevented. The reason that TB isn't being prevented is that preventing diseases like TB cuts the profits of the capitalists that run the city hospitals. Therefore, the hospitals don't work on preventing these diseases. The Young Lords Party has always said that the time will come when the people take over all the institutions and machinery that control and exploit our lives. On this day, we liberated an X-ray truck from the politicians that had been using the truck only for propaganda purposes that serve their own interests, and profiteering businessmen that only think about making money. The truck was seized only after members of the party had gone to the Tuberculosis Society several times asking them for the use of the truck. Each time, the request was refused. By refusing us, they made it clear that they aren't concerned with the health of our people. We realized that the reason our people didn't use it was because the people running the show prior to the Lords were outsiders who couldn't relate to our people, our language, and our customs. They never made any real attempt to get the people to use the X-ray facilities. In the 3 days that we have had the truck, we have already tested 770 people. According to the technicians, that the usual amount of people taken care of in the same amount of time is about only 300. So far as the Young Lords Party is concerned, this truck rightfully belongs to the people. The last point of our 13-point program and platform states, we want a socialist society. Under a socialist society, medical services are extended outside of the hospital by setting up clinics in all communities and by visiting people's homes. This type of medical service is called preventative medicine. Although doctors admit it is needed, preventative medicine will never be done in America as it is today, because in the capitalist society in which we live, capitalists run health services in order to make more money, not to improve healthcare. The sicker we are, the more money the capitalist makes. The Young Lords Party believes that healthcare should be a right for all people, not a privilege. That is why we put the X-ray facilities in the hands of the people. The Ramon Emeterio Betances free X-ray truck now belongs to the people. It will be on the streets 7 days a week, 10 hours a day. This truck is here to service the needs of our people. All power to the people. Free healthcare for all. Liberate Puerto Rico now.
Dorothea Dix worked as an educator and author until she took up the campaign for improving the treatment for the mentally ill. Struggling with depression and other mental illnesses herself, Dix presented this petition to the Massachusetts state legislature in 1843 after visiting a number of jails to chronicle abuses.
Gentlemen, I respectfully ask to present this memorial, believing that the cause which actuates to and sanctions so unusual a movement presents no equivocal claim to public consideration and sympathy. About 2 years since leisure accorded opportunity and duty prompted me to visit several prisons and almshouses in the vicinity of the metropolis. I found near Boston, in the jails and asylums for the poor, a numerous class brought into unsuitable connection with criminals and the general mass of paupers. I refer to idiots and insane persons dwelling in circumstances not only adverse to their own physical and moral improvement, but productive of extreme disadvantages to all other persons brought into association with them. I applied myself diligently to trace the causes of these evils and sought to supply remedies. As one obstacle was surmounted, fresh difficulties appeared. Every new investigation has given depth to the conviction that it is only by decided, prompt, and vigorous legislation the evils to which I refer and which I shall proceed more fully to illustrate can be remedied. I shall be obliged to speak with great plainness and to reveal many things revolting to the taste, and from which my woman's nature shrinks with peculiar sensitiveness. But truth is the highest consideration. I tell what I have seen, painful and shocking as the details often are, that from them you may feel more deeply the imperative obligation which lies upon you to prevent the possibility of a repetition or continuance of such outrages upon humanity. I come to present the strong claims of suffering humanity. I come to place before the legislature of Massachusetts the condition of the miserable, the desolate, the outcast. I come as an advocate of helpless, forgotten, insane, and idiotic men and women, of beings sunk to a condition from which the most unconcerned we start with real horror, of beings wretched in our prisons and more wretched in our almshouses. Lincoln, a woman in a cage. Medford, one idiotic subject chained, and one in a close stall for 17 years. Pepperell, one often doubly chained hand and foot, another violent, several peaceful now. Brookfield, one man caged, comfortable. Granville, one often closely confined, now losing the one of his limbs from want of exercise. Charlemont, one man caged. Savoy, one man caged. Lennox, two in the jail against whose unfit condition the jailer protests. Dedham, the insane disadvantageously placed in the jail. In the almshouses, two females in stalls, situated in the main building, lie in wooden bunks filled with straw, always shut up. One of these subjects is supposed curable. The overseers of the poor have declined giving her a trial at the hospital, as I was informed, on account of expense. Besides the above, I have seen many who part of the year are changed or caged. The use of cages, all but universal, hardly a town, but can refer to some not distant period of using them. Chains are less common. Negligences frequent. Willful abuse less frequent, and sufferings proceeding from ignorance or want of consideration. I encountered during the last 3 months many poor creatures wandering reckless and unprotected through the country. I give a few illustrations, but description fades before reality. Men of Massachusetts, I beg, I implore, I demand pity and protection for these of my suffering, outraged sex. Fathers, husbands, brothers, I would supplicate you for this boon, but what do I say? I dishonor you, divest you at once of Christianity and humanity. Does this appeal imply distrust? If it comes burdened with a doubt of your righteousness in this legislation, then blot it out, while I declare confidence in your honor, not less than in your humanity. Here you will put away the cold, calculating spirit of selfishness and self-seeking. Lay off the armor of local strife and political opposition. Here and now, for once, forgetful of the earthly and perishable, come up to these halls and consecrate them with one heart and one mind to works of righteousness and just judgment.
Celebrated for her work to uplift Brazil's most marginalized communities, Marielle Franco was an Afro-Brazilian politician, human rights defender, and sociologist, born in the Maré favela of Rio de Janeiro. This article, titled Last Words, was submitted on the day of her assassination in March 2018. Scholar, activist, and filmmaker Dr. Sherelle Barber attended the event in Rio where Marielle spoke just hours before she was murdered. It was a night that would truly change Dr. Barber's life and forever commit her to not only sharing Franco's story, but also to catalyzing transnational Black feminist solidarities.
Labor reform laws, a constitutional amendment on state spending, pension reforms, the profound changes advanced by the Temer government, inspired by a retrograde political project aligned with international capital and the corporate sector, are pushing a group of our citizens into a spiral of poverty. In this context, we seek to widen our inquiry into the federally backed military intervention in the security of Rio de Janeiro. We aim to evaluate the real intentions of this intervention, given that Rio de Janeiro state is in 10th place in rankings of violence behind other cities, as documented in the Public Security Yearbook. As such, the military intervention in Rio looks to rest upon a justification that has no basis in reality. Our question, which will not be silenced, why Rio de Janeiro? Recent experiences show that military occupations do not solve the problem of insecurity. Among other things, it's important to note the timing of when the military has been brought to the streets to solve an emergency situation. What is common to all such occurrences is not that they take place during periods of heightened security concerns, but rather that they all take place in election years. What has been the result of this political strategy? The federal intervener, General Braga Neto, declared that Rio de Janeiro is a laboratory for Brazil. And what we see is that in this laboratory, the experimental subjects are Black men and women living on the peripheries of the city, favela residents, workers. Singling out favelas as places of peril and encouraging fears that the dangers to be found there will spill out onto the rest of the city creates a false narrative of dangerous classes, as the psychologist Cecilia Coimbra amply highlights, framing the favela as a main target and a public enemy. Last weekend, at least 5 people died and 4 were wounded in the Rio metro area. Of these, 4 were women. Alba Valeria Machado died trying to protect her son. Natalina de Concejo was hit during a confrontation between military police and drug traffickers. Janaína da Silva Oliveira died during an attempted assault in Ricardo de Albuquerque. Taina dos Santos was hit by rifle fire in the community of Villa Alianza. Black women living on the peripheries lose their children to this deadly viciousness. Such a worrying trend demonstrates that on the eve of the 1-month anniversary of the intervention, promises of security have not gone beyond media talking points, and the deaths have a consistent racial identity, social class, and neighborhood of dwelling. Without a doubt, public security should no longer be pursued with weapons, but with public policy in all areas: health, education, culture, and the creation of jobs and income. The need for us to monitor this process is abundantly clear, all the while being careful to fight for the guarantee of individual and collective rights so that democratic institutions may be preserved and continue to be autonomous. The contrary to this would reveal itself to be something very dangerous in a society that has a patriomilitist tradition, little interest in the democratic process, and a historically violent relationship to its most vulnerable populations.
Essex Hemphill, an African-American poet, essayist, editor, and gay activist, has become one of the best-known Black gay authors since James Baldwin, openly addressing race, identity, sexuality, HIV, AIDS, and the family in his work. Hemphill died of complications from AIDS in 1995. Here, Michael Roberson, who founded the Federation of Ballroom Houses and co-created the National Black Gay Men's Advocacy Group, reads Hemphill's poem, For My Own Protection.
I want to start an organization. I said, I want to start an organization. I said, I want to start an organization to save my life. If whales, snails, dogs, and cats, crawler and can be saved, then the lives of Black men are priceless and can be saved. We should be able to save each other. I don't want to wait for the Heritage Foundation to release a study saying Black people are extinct. I don't want to be the living dead, pacified with drugs, sex, and rock and roll. If a human chain can be formed around nuclear missile sites, then surely Black men can form human chains around Anacostia, Harlem, South Africa, Wall Street, Hollywood, each other. And we have to take tomorrow with blood. Are we ready? Do our S-curls and dreadlocks and Phillies make us any more ready than a Bush or a concubine? I'm not concerned about the attire of a soldier. All I want to know for my own protection is, are we capable of whatever, whenever? Ashe, amen, and a woman.
I heard an angel singing when the day was springing. Mercy, pity, peace is the world's release. And thus he sung all day over the new moon hay till the sun went down and haycocks looked brown. I heard a devil curse over the heath and the furs, and mercy could be no more if there was nobody poor. And pity no more could be if all were happy as we. At his curse the sun went down and the heavens gave a frown. Down poured the heavy rain over the new reaped grain, and miseries increase for mercy, pity, peace. I heard an angel singing.
Thank you. Thank you to all of the readers and performers for bringing to life that powerful collection of voices. We close tonight with a brief, collective moment of silence in recognition and to honor the many lives we have lost. Thank you. Thank you to everyone who donated their time putting together this incredible event, to those of you who donated to Voices of a People's History, whose mission is to amplify the extraordinary words of ordinary people throughout our shared past. And to the organizations listed in the chat, look out for a follow-up email tomorrow with links in case there are any organizations you missed but would like to support. Thank you for joining us. Good night, stay safe, and see you in the streets.
Why can't we talk about it? What are we gonna do? Here lies the logic that remains today. We don't know what we're in for. There's flashing lights, no open doors, and it's sad to watch, make you cry. We're too young to die. Brothers, send a message to stand down, and you gotta hurry for it's
Thank you.